Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ webinar series. I'm David Parsons, Senior Vice President and Spokesman for the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, coming to you from our TV studios in the Israeli capital. And we are approaching the one-year anniversary of the October 7 massacres down along the Gaza border. And we want to bring you a one-year review of where this conflict has gone. It quickly mushroomed into what Israeli officials have described as a seven-front confrontation with Iran and its terror militias, all its proxy militias. And to help us with this, we're going to the go-to guy, IDF Major in reserves, Elliot Chodoff, who lives up in the north. He's been under shelling over the past week or two. Of course, he's faced this for many years, living around 7-8 miles below the Lebanese border. But he's been in the IDF for, he served for over 35 years, wrote training and field manuals for them. He's an excellent security analyst, used by I-24 News a lot during this war and other media outlets, and of course by the Christian Embassy, and also is still involved with the IDF Home Front Command in the north, specializing in Israeli society's resilience during this conflict. Elliot, good to see you again.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Yes. I'm hoping you're doing well up there, you and your family, and it's sort of changed over recent weeks.
Yeah, it's been a little more stressful over the last couple of weeks, but I would say in a positive sense now that we've begun to take the offensive against Hezbollah. Yes,
yeah, I know something feels like it's broken, that fear for years of all of Israel getting saturated with thousands of missiles every day.
Yes.
The IDF, we'll talk about it later in the show, but we got to get back to October 7, almost 1 year ago. As of this coming Monday, it will be the one-year anniversary. And of course, as we look at the map here, this represents in the purple the deepest penetration of the Hamas terrorists coming across. Elliot, the new estimate is there were as many as 6,000 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists and some other civilians and looters who came along with them, rather than just 3,000, 3,500. They killed 1,200 Israelis, kidnapped 250. Take us back to that day.
Well, that day, of course, started at 6:30 in the morning with a rocket barrage, followed by, as you said, some 6,000 terrorists coming across the border, being mutilating, taking hostages, catching bodies. But I think beyond that, and of course, there's no other way to describe it other than a terrific failure of the IDF that morning. Intelligence failure for sure, but also an operational failure. In other words, even as a surprise attack, had the IDF been properly arrayed, properly aligned, the catastrophe as it was wouldn't have happened. There would have been an issue there. I'm sure that there would have been murders and et cetera, but not on that scale. And that was their first, let's say, 4 or 5 hours from that early morning attack. They basically had the field to themselves, if you will. The big news beyond that is that the system, at least in its lower echelons, got its act together very, very quickly. It took the high command longer. This is also something that's somewhat typical of the IDF. It happened at other times as well, and that is that mid-ranking and junior officers got it together, got moving in all sorts of ways, and when the stories come out, it's going to be one of those, you can't make a movie about it because it's so unbelievable. But within a number of hours, forces started moving into the area, even without a clear picture of what was going on, and there was chaos for many, many hours. but within about 24 hours, the terrorists had been utterly and thoroughly defeated. Now, I think it's important to understand that their plan was to go much further than they did, with greater force going deeper than they did, and possibly additional force coming in later in the day and the next day, with their most optimistic plans to actually cross as far as the area of Judea, of Hebron, and to hold out in municipalities for as long as 30 days. We have that from orders that we've captured, and also from the supplies and provisions they brought with them. So within, for our purposes, 24 hours, utterly defeated. We're no longer any terrorists operating in any organized fashion. There were still a few individuals running around, but by the next day, by Sunday morning or so, they'd been either all killed, captured, or had fled back into Gaza with or without hostages. That was the first sort of step, or the first move of those 24 hours.
Yeah. Here on Highway 4 at the Erez crossing, they plan to go to a prison up past Ashkelon, release some Palestinian prisoners, arm them. But they didn't get past Yad Mordechai. They held out there along that highway. Here at Ofakim, their deepest penetration, there's a big air base here, Hatzarim base. They had plans to reach that, destroy planes on the tarmac, but they didn't make it.
As I said, they plan to go as far as Hebron, in other words, beyond Beersheba, that you can see down at the bottom of the map, to get to places to cities like Kiryat Gat, Ashkelon, and get in there, as they did in Sderot and Ofakim, where they never really held anything. They rampaged through Sderot, but they were never able to get a real foothold. And part of it, as I said, a good part of it, the bravery and the initiative of Israeli troops on the ground. Some of the residents, who also the security teams in the kibbutzim in particular, but not only. And in part here, I have to say, now with retrospect, and we're learning more and more about what went on, they were good at the first stage of planning. Their further execution was also very poor. In other words, they trained up for, let's say, for the first 5-6 hours, and after that they couldn't follow through. They got hung up in all sorts of places that, in retrospect, they could have gotten further, but they didn't for whatever reasons. And here we know for a fact many of them stayed in the Nova Music Festival to rampage and rape rather than continue on to their objectives. So that tells us something about them as well.
They're enjoying the carnage a little too much. Yes.
Yes. Let's say they were more interested in that than gaining their objectives.
And probably a little afraid to get too far from Gaza. They wanted to be able to retreat.
No, I don't think so. At that stage, I think the opposite. I think at that stage, they were probably in the euphoria of victory, thinking, well, we've got all the time in the world. And we don't need to stick to a timetable. We caught them totally by surprise. What's another couple of hours going to matter? And there they were totally mistaken, and they were stopped. Yeah.
I think the take is that Hezbollah troops are a lot more disciplined. They'd kill and keep moving, whereas Hamas dallied a little amid the carnage.
Yes, that's the impression. Although here now, Hezbollah today is not what we thought it was a year ago. So a couple of other things happened in rapid succession on the 6th, 7th, and 8th that also caught them, and I think here caught Hezbollah and its allies somewhat more by surprise. And when we get to Hezbollah, I'll explain more in detail what that means. But essentially, on the morning of October 7th, the government and Prime Minister Netanyahu already declared that we're in a war. Now, that has military, economic, legal ramifications, And for those who might think, well, of course you were at war. That declaration, just as in the United States, you can have military action without declaration of war here as well. And there's a reticence. No, you don't want to declare it as a war, as I said, for all sorts of reasons. And that was done already in the morning of the 7th. Israel had been a greatly divided society politically. Mass demonstrations against the government going on, threats of refusal to serve in the reserves. And also that morning, the leaders of the demonstrations of protest movement got up and said, we're at war. This is a war of survival. If you get called up, you go. None of this, no threats of refusal and that sort of thing. Two other things happened also in rapid succession on the 8th. And one was the call-up of nearly 400,000 reservists in the largest reserve call-up in Israel's history, and the fastest. They mobilized extremely quickly, and within a couple of days, there were some 400,000 reservists deployed both in the southern border and the northern border facing Hezbollah. And last but not least, the populations of both the what is called the Gaza envelope, the area around the Gaza Strip, and the immediate belt along the northern border with Lebanon were evacuated. And what that meant, in the Gaza area, it was primarily to clear the area, prepare for military operations, and also, frankly, given the unknowns, not to leave people exposed in a completely shattered civil infrastructure. In the north, it was in anticipation of Hezbollah trying to pull an October 7th type attack, perhaps on the 8th or the 9th or the 10th or whatever, and to get those people out of the way and out of range. So by October 10th or so, 10th, 11th, the Israeli system had completely recovered. Obviously, the society has not recovered from the shock, but the system as an institutional system had recovered and had bounced back, so that both of those borders within 3 or 4 days looked nothing at all like the way they looked on October 6th, the day before the massacre took place. And that completely changed the civil defense situation along both of those borders. And it had, in my opinion, a huge effect on Hezbollah's behavior. And again, we'll get to that when we talk about them. And that had a ripple effect through the other proxies, the Houthis, the West Bank, and of course Iran, all part of the same picture in different parts of the mosaic.
Yeah, I think the Arabs of the West Bank and even in Israel saw that Israel was serious. It had taken a very brutal blow, but was serious in responding. That massive call-up of troops, the largest ever. Just want to let people know the Christian Embassy took around 700 Christians at the end of our Feast of Tabernacles celebration. It ended on the 6th of October. The 5th, on Thursday, we did a solidarity rally in Sderot. We came down Highway 232 to the Bay Area, went out here right on the border and planted trees, some oak trees in our new Christian Embassy Nature Park right here, and then came back and had lunch at Kibbutz Alamim. So 2 days before this all happened, we had 700 Christians down there for a solidarity visit with the people we've been working with in this area, putting in bomb shelters, helping them with firefighting equipment, communication equipment for the first responders and security teams. A lot of investment that we've done in this area. And as bad as October 7 was, we have heard that all that we did saved thousands of lives that day, along with everyone else trying to help these people be resilient and not get chased out. Okay, as we look at it, this was one of the, I think, around 150 breaches through the security fence, supposed to be the most secure security fence in the world, and Hamas made quick work over that morning. They had been preparing this, even hiding explosives in the sand near the fence in the days beforehand. This is the youth area. If you were a young member of the kibbutz Be'eri, this is apartments you got when you got 18, and it was devastated. It was the part of the kibbutz facing Gaza, and everyone here murdered that morning, 6:37 in the morning. Horrible carnage. This is the near the Nova Music Festival. Cars parked all along the highways. You can see they're burned, they're shot up, every one of them open. People shot driving in their cars. Just absolute carnage. Here, people fleeing from the music festival. This is, of course, the Lady in Red, as she came to be known. Really traumatized by all this. There were around 3,000 at the festival, and this is just, I think on the 10th of October, just a few days later, as they finally got in, identifying bodies, collecting them, putting them in body bags at Kibbutz Be'eri, just the aftermath of it in Israel, coming to terms with what happened that day. This is the Sderot police station that the terrorists overran. I think there were about 13 terrorists in there when the IDF finally shows up ready to confront them. And rather than trying to send troops in and risk lives, they just blew up the building. And here is an image of the memorial that they are. I was just down there last week, about 5 days ago, and they're very quickly trying to set up a memorial site at the police station. The whole area is leveled, and this will be dedicated on October 7, on Monday, there in Sderot. Okay, if we can go to full screen with Elliot and I. Elliot, given the rapid, incredible developments in the north over recent weeks, it just sort of reinforces the feeling that the fighting in Gaza was sluggish, was slow. Can you tell us why?
It was methodical rather than sluggish, although if we were doing a full couple of hours of tactical analysis, I have my criticism. But having said that, Gaza is a particularly tough nut to crack. Large civilian population, primarily urban warfare. In other words, the Gaza as an area is made up of essentially 3 major cities with surrounding neighborhoods and suburbs. The cities are Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. It's often referred to by its Arab name, Rafah. I'll use the Hebrew, Rafah. And urban warfare is its own issue. On top of that, Hamas has spent the past over 15 years turning those cities into strongholds above and below ground. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of tunnel networks, multi-level tunnel networks, some of them going down 20 and 30 meters. That's 6, 7, 8 stories down below ground. So if urban warfare is a nightmare, tunnel warfare is worse. And the IDF went in initially with 5 divisions with the purpose of destroying Hamas's military capability. Military capability meaning the some 28 battalions that Hamas was fielding, plus its arms storage, its rocket capability, which was considerable, and do it all with a minimum of civilian casualties, despite what the Western media and part of the Western world is saying. There's certainly not a genocide going on, much less than that. Certainly civilians have been killed and injured. There's no way of fighting war without it, unless you're fighting in a completely open field away from a population. In urban warfare, certainly not. But with great care, and that requires time. In other words, setting it up properly, isolating areas properly, and the like. The result speaks for itself. Hamas militarily has essentially been destroyed. I say essentially because not absolute, but of the 28 or so battalions, there may be 1 or 2 left in any sort of fighting capacity. The fighting has become low intensity insurgency, counterterrorism kind of fighting, but it's still going on. As a matter of fact, we took out a Hamas position yesterday in Gaza City in a school, but not in their original position. In other words, part of what's happened over these months is the destruction of their original headquarters and communication centers and the like. So now when they're moving back in, they're taking over civilian infrastructure, schools, mosques, and so on. But I think that although numbers don't tell the whole story, the fact is that we have killed some 20,000 Hamas terrorists and lost approximately 400 soldiers in the process. Now, every loss is a tragedy, and I'm certainly not belittling it, but the ratio tells something of the overwhelming victory on the ground by the IDF, and part of that ratio has to do with the slow and methodical way that it was done. So I'll say it was longer than I would have liked, longer than I think it should have taken, but not by orders of magnitude. In other words, this was not going to be a 6-day war in Gaza.
Yeah. You have, a really lopsided ratio on the battlefield, but you've got these tunnels and tunnel warfare underneath. But it was also a very critical decision when the world community insisted that over 2 million Gazan civilians must stay on the battlefield. You can't evacuate them out temporarily, say to Sinai, right. And that really made it much more difficult for Israel and started leading to these charges of genocide and trying to starve them because you also got to get food in. And can you describe, something about it's unprecedented where Israel was required to feed an enemy?
Absolutely unprecedented. The Geneva Convention calls for allowing an enemy population to evacuate. It calls for not targeting civilians, taking care not to cause civilian casualties beyond what is required in military terms, but there's no requirement to actually provide humanitarian aid to an enemy population that's not under your control. And here I want to emphasize, if they're under your control, you're an occupying power. It's a whole different set of rules according to Geneva and international law. But it was done, and I think it was done correctly in theory. The practice, of course, is much more problematic because Hamas doesn't play by the rules. Hamas steals a good part to this day, a good part of the humanitarian aid. It's part of what's feeding them. And here, paradoxically, it's making the fight that much longer and that much more difficult. At the same time, the primary agency through which that humanitarian aid is going in, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, is operating hand in hand with Hamas. As a matter of fact, a couple of days ago in Lebanon, we took out a leading Hamas operative who was also the director of the UNRWA operation in his area, the UNRWA school. So they're drawing two salaries, one from the United Nations and the other from Hamas, and nobody seems to have a big issue with that. So to repeat it, in the grand sense, it's the right thing to do. We don't want a humanitarian disaster beyond the war itself. It's certainly not our purpose, but at the same time, the world pressure and the United States pressure in particular, the fact that it is not recognized that Hamas has an interest in getting that aid and it's just being thrown in there. These are all things that are working to their benefit and not to ours. But with it all, we're still facing an overwhelming victory as a result of our operations.
And do you think it's at the point where Hamas is losing its grip on power? A lot of it is through control of the food that's going in. Is it losing its grip on power over Gaza? And who is it losing it to? Are these local village elders, tribal elders starting to cooperate with Israel like they are hoping, rather than having to work with the Palestinian Authority?
No. Hamas is still the administrative power in Gaza. They still have enough operatives with enough brutality. As a matter of fact, just the other day, they murdered a woman who was the head of one of the charitable organizations in Gaza. She refused to hand over her collected charity to Hamas, so they murdered her. And they murdered her in public in her car, fired bullets into her. It's a message. And it's a message that's obviously not just to her, but to anybody else who might want to buck their rule and their control. So until they're completely eradicated, and here I have to say all the talk, and especially coming out of the U.S. administration, of the day after having to put something in place to prevent Hamas from regaining control, doesn't understand that the day after has to be a day after without Hamas, not a Hamas that's pushed into the sidelines and sort of kept out, because it will not be kept out. Just to be so, in 2006, when they took over, they overwhelmed Fatah, killed them by the hundreds, and simply took over control. They'll do it again if they have any opportunity to do so. So a weakened Hamas is not the ultimate goal here. A destroyed Hamas is the goal.
It seems like the Biden administration, a lot of their pronouncements and policies were designed to preserve Hamas in Gaza.
Yes.
They weren't helpful. 1 year since this conflict started, are we going to get a ceasefire with Hezbollah not in a position anymore to help Hamas that much? Is Sinwar going to do a ceasefire and hostage deal now? Is he even still alive?
Okay, there are a few questions there. First of all, Hezbollah is clearly weakened. That story is still going on. We just went in on the ground last night, but they're not really in a position to help Hamas. And the fact is, they haven't really been helping Hamas. What they've been doing is symbolic, not really practical since October 7th. Is Sinwar still alive? That's a big question mark. As a matter of fact, there was a photograph up yesterday in the chief of staff's office with Sinwar's picture in the background with a question mark on him. So the answer is right. We don't know. We just don't know. Will they make a deal? Will there be a ceasefire? I believe not. Because even if Sinwar is dead, there's another Sinwar, his brother, who is apparently even more radical than he is. They started this in order to win. And it's a common error, I think, that's made in the West, and not just with Hamas, but with others, with totalitarians in general. And I throw the whole bunch of them into that category. They go into these things to win, and they go into negotiations to win. They're not interested in ending anything. They do want to end the Israeli offensive. And here, if I may, there's all this talk about ending the war. This is not about ending the war. For Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, the end of the war is the end of Israel. And what they want is to stop the Israeli offensive so that you can continue the war on their terms. Now, after the 7th, we're not playing that game. So a ceasefire that doesn't end with a victory for them is not going to happen. And a ceasefire that does end with a victory for them is not going to happen from our side, as far as I can tell. But that's where we stand. They have no real interest at the moment, anyway, in doing that. When Hezbollah is really defeated, Iran is pushed back and neutralized, then the remnant of Hamas may decide to throw in the towel and say enough is enough. But that's still down the road.
Yeah. So to sum up here on the Southern Front, I think the wounds inflicted on October 7 You said the IDF and the state recovered quickly within a few days to start punching back. It's been a slow, methodical attack to really weaken Hamas. That's been successful, but until the remaining 100 hostages, some, maybe as many as half may still be alive, until they're back, those wounds really aren't going to fully heal. But things have started turning around because of the northern front. And I think that started in mid-April when Iran was retaliating for the death of 2 generals that Israel killed in Syria and fired 350 ballistic cruise missiles and drones at Israel, and 99% shot down, no real damage. Israel started getting its confidence back since then. It looks like we lost our guest, Elliot Chodoff, up in northern Israel. He's just a few miles from the northern border, and he says there's a widespread power outage up there. So if I may, I'll just finish out today's program by reviewing what's been happening in the last few weeks. I just asked him, it seemed in April when Israel shot down all these 350 rockets and drones fired from Iran directly, the first major direct Iranian attack on Israel. They always use proxies, a little too cowardly and afraid to confront Israel directly, but they felt they had to retaliate. They did it. And then they got embarrassed when Israel, with help from the US, the UK, and others, shot down all these rockets. I think it was April 13. And since then, we've really, it's been building up and building up this whole series of very impressive intelligence and military successes by Israel, sort of accelerated over the last month or so. They of course, took out these pagers and walkie-talkies. Somehow they inserted explosives in the batteries of these pagers and walkie-talkies that Iran was supplying to the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the battle has shifted more and more to the northern front over the recent months, and especially the last 4 or 5 weeks. And it starts with these pagers exploding all everywhere. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic for all of us to watch. Within an hour, here's 3,000 or 4,000 communication devices. If you had them, it meant you were a Hezbollah operative, part of the inner circle, their communications, secured network. They did, Nasrallah, their head, said, we don't want to use cell phones. The Israelis can track it, can hack them. So we'll use these pagers and walkie-talkies that happen to be rigged by Israel in an operation they had planned for several years. And I mean, even the whole Arab world were just hypnotized by what was happening there. Instantly, a legend, what the Mossad, Israeli security, and the Israeli military were doing. The pagers one day, the next day, these walkie-talkies. And they also took out an underground missile factory in Syria. It was about 50 miles below, above the border of Lebanon, northern Lebanon, an underground missile factory where they were making new long-range missiles, fitting them with GPS, taking older missiles, fitting them with guidance systems, GPS guidance systems, a very important factory in Syria to feed those missiles very quickly down into Lebanon. And Israel actually put boots on the ground, sent in troops elite troops on helicopters, and they rappelled down some ropes, went under the facility, stole documents, and whether they took captives, some say there were Iranians down there, we'll see eventually, but blew up. It was kind of deep. Could they really hit it with bunker buster bombs? But they went in and blew up this factory, just mesmerizing. And then Nasrallah and other top commanders have all been taken out. their intelligence commander, the head of the rocket division, the head of their drone division, the head of their southern command, one by one, logistics, training, indicating that Hezbollah is deeply, deeply penetrated by Israel. Someone is right there inside of Hezbollah telling the Israelis exactly where everyone is. Preemptive strikes on 1,000 rocket launchers 15 minutes before they were scheduled to all fire a massive barrage into Israel. That was after, in retaliation for Israel taking out Fuad Shukar, their senior military commander, their top military commander. And of course, 2,000 targeted sites. Israel's had I think what we have to say is that part of why there was such an intelligence failure here on the southern border was that Israel over the last 15, 20 years, since the 2006 Second Lebanon War, Israel has focused its intelligence and military planning on Hezbollah, viewing it as a much bigger threat. They have 2 or 3 times the trained soldiers, 10 times the arsenal of rockets, much more dangerous, much heavier payloads, many of them guided, longer range. So there's been a focus on Hezbollah planning to really take them out. And we've seen over recent weeks some of the things that were planned coming to fruition, including a target list, high value targets developed over many years with the assistance of AI, artificial intelligence, that there was a 2-day period where Israel took out 2,000 sites. They've been attacking Hezbollah for 10, 11 months now, taking out a lot of their rocket sites, a lot of their weapons depots, ammos, all the way up in the Bekaa Valley, not quite in Beirut yet. But now they've started striking in Beirut. But in a 48-hour period, Israel took out 2,000 high-value targets, and it just shows how deeply Hezbollah has been penetrated. And finally, this moment, Prime Minister just last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking at the opening assembly at the United Nations, telling the world that they have a choice between the blessing of the Abraham Accords, Israel reconciling, naturalizing relations with the Saudis, of course, peace with Egypt, with other countries. Sudan had signed on the Abraham Accords, trade between India, Southeast Asia, China, and all, moving through the Middle East in a much more peaceful, stable region. This is the blessing that the world has to choose, or the curse of Iran and its crescent of Shiite aligned proxy terror militias from Iran into Iraq, into Syria and Lebanon, also the Shiite Houthi rebels down in Yemen who are firing all the way to Israel, that they're trying to block the trade routes, destroy Israel, retake Jerusalem. And as the Ayatollah Khomeini, the founding of the Islamic Revolution, said, we can wage a global jihad and dominate the world. But the first sign that Allah is with us for this is the retaking of Jerusalem. That's the curse that the world has to choose in supporting Iran or appeasing Iran or helping them in any way. Don't call for ceasefires. Let Israel finish the job. As Netanyahu was giving this speech at the United Nations, just a few minutes after he got down from the podium, we had this massive explosion in Beirut, 80 tons of high explosives. It's 80 bunker buster bombs that were sent down in certain succession and penetrating deep in order to take out Hassan Nasrallah himself. The intelligence said he was in his main command bunker. Israel knew where that was for months, but they waited for the right moment. He was meeting with some of his top officials, watching Netanyahu's speech, and preparing their next plan, retaliation for all that Israel was doing, and all of a sudden the bunker gets destroyed, and here's the frantic search. It was just at dusk and into the night. The rescue teams are trying to find the different bodies. Of course, they were about 60 feet underground in a bunker, and it took a few days to pull them out. And this is a photo that Israel released. The Prime Minister Netanyahu, just before he went on to give his speech before the UN, he green-lighted the attack that would come against Hassan Nasrallah, the long-serving supreme leader of the Hezbollah terror militia. They've had a lot of innocent blood from many nations, American soldiers, French soldiers, Argentinian Jews, Argentinian citizens. The list could go on and on. No one should weep for the loss of this man. He was a major linchpin in Iran's whole designs, that whole crescent, the curse map that Netanyahu showed of that he was the main strategist together with Khamenei. This is the successor Ayatollah to Khomeini, who founded the revolution in '79. Khamenei took over around 1992. He knew Nasrallah as a young student in Madras in Qom. He was from South Lebanon, but had been taken to Iran to study, and they formed a close relationship, and he was sent back to Lebanon. A year or two later, he became the head of Hezbollah. It had already existed. He had been a part of it before, but he was now the commander of it, and had developed the whole strategy of the ring of fire, the noose around Israel from Hamas, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from terror militias in Syria and Iraq. A real part of this with Soleimani. This was the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that was charged with exporting the revolution, recruiting, building, financing, training, all these proxy militias. He's dead, taken out, I think, to the year 2020 by the United States. In Baghdad. He was visiting Baghdad to talk to some of the Shiite pro-Iranian militias there. Nasrallah is gone. As soon as he's killed, Khamenei vows revenge, but then goes into hiding in a safe place, they said, fearing that Iran itself is also highly compromised. Israel took out the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in their main guest house in Tehran just a few months ago, killing, their guest, the head of Hamas at the time. So even Khamenei is hiding now. Nasrallah had been hiding in tunnels, in bunkers underground since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. And so these gentlemen, if I could call them that, are eliminated, and he is wondering just, can I trust anyone around me right now? So it's coming out more and more. That first half of this one-year war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, it quickly expanded into a 7-front war, but over the last 6 months of it, the first 6 months, very difficult. The loss, the fact that there's still 100 hostages dead or alive in Gaza, very painful for Israel, but they managed to really weaken Hamas and now deal these incredible blows to Hezbollah and to Iran and its prestige itself. Many in the Sunni Arab world are mocking these people for trying to stand up to Israel, and we'll see where this conflict goes. But as we pass the 1-year mark since October 7, it remains the darkest, most difficult day for the Jewish people, the largest pogrom against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. but it could have been worse. Hezbollah could have joined immediately, done similar attacks in the north. As it's played out, we have to thank God that things are turning around. Israel's getting its confidence back, going on the offensive. As we're recording, there's rocket attacks on Tel Aviv. The power is out on the north, but Hezbollah has been able to do very little damage, not what we were really fearing. And it may take Israel a few more months, another year or whatever, to stay on a war footing, to really break this noose, break this ring of fire around it. But we need to be standing with Israel during this time. I hope you've enjoyed this one-year review. After October 7, we ask for you to pray and honor those who fell that day. Please take time that day to honor them and to pray and to join with other Christians and Jewish people in standing in their memory, coming together in their memory. And that's our program for this week. And we want to tell you we'll be back after the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah starts in just a few days, and after that you've got Yom Kippur and the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll be hosting our feast for a whole week from the 16th through 23rd of October, and it'll probably be in November before we come back with another webinar because of all of the time demands that we'll have in preparing and putting on the feast. So we thank you for joining us today, and remember to stay tuned with the ICEJ at the top of the hour at 4 o'clock Israel time. You can join our global prayer gathering, joining with Christians from all over the world, praying for Israel and this region. We believe many of the developments that we've been talking about today are an answer to the prayers of the saints from all around the world, standing with Israel and helping it to turn the tide of battle over this past year against these ruthless enemies. But Israel is going to come out victorious. We bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.
Want to stay up to date with the latest developments in Israel?
Make sure to check out our weekly recap where we give you the latest and most important headlines every Monday.
Follow us on our social media to stay notified.
As we approach this year's Feast of Tabernacles, we have an incredible opportunity for Christians everywhere to unite our congregations in solidarity with Israel and celebrate this biblical festival together before the Lord. Imagine transforming your church or home into a vibrant feast watch party and prayer gathering, combining the joy of Sukkot with prayer for Israel. This is your chance to strengthen bonds within your community and stand as one for Zion. Here's how you can organize an impactful feast watch party. First, select an ICEJ feast event. Invite your congregations to gather. Start with a brief message to set the tone. Watch the selected content and engage in prayers for Israel and the region, and even share a festive meal together in your sukkah. This is more than just a watch party. It is an opportunity to deepen fellowship, strengthen faith, and show solidarity with Israel in a very difficult time for this nation. The feast program includes a desert celebration, varying teachings on this year's feast theme, messages and worship from leaders both international and Israeli, a beautiful communion service at the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, a powerful evening for the next generation, and a majestic roll call of the nations and Israeli guest night at the Tower of David. Even though you cannot make it to Israel this year, by hosting a feast watch and prayer gathering in your church or home, you can still respond to the calling of Zechariah 14 verse 16 to come up to Jerusalem from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Start planning your feast watch party today. Join the nations as we gather as one to worship our God and pray for deliverance in Zion.